get upset on the internet. You're a salted dog.
Hey everybody, and welcome aboard the Retro Station 1989. I'm Commander Dan, the commander and lone human inhabitant aboard the Retro Station, and this is License to Play, where we evaluate licensed video games from the past, and we decide whether or not they have a license to play. Licensed like after a movie or TV show or video game. If it has a license and it's retro, we evaluate it. For you. For all of us. Alright, and this week we're going into one of the many 80s licenses I have a great fondness for, but often comes up Snake Eyes for me. No, not G.I. Joe. No. But another action hero. More relentless, more metal, and more trigger-happy than all of the Joes and Cobra put together. We went into another title by the same creator a while back. You'll maybe recognize them as we're talking. But let's talk about him real quick, and then about this week's license.
Commander, before we begin, have you had a chance to use the holographic assistant I created yet?
Hey, Margot, no. I haven't had a chance yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I might even have a chance today to put the thing to good use if I'm right about this evaluation.
Just remember, we can only use it 3 times before it has to be recharged, which takes a year in Earth time.
Gotcha. Well, while I come up with a couple questions for the assistant, take a look at this little context behind what's going to be, well, hellish for all of us, I promise you. And we start in the year 1985. Folks, it's the dead center of the 80s, and it doesn't get much more 80s than this. Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, Thriller, arcades, leg warmers. This was the decade I was a kid, and it was awesome, scary, and in 1985, a movie came out called Flesh and Blood. Never saw it. But it's not for lack of trying. This movie is hard to come by legitimately. It stars Rutger Hauer and Jennifer Jason Leigh, and is what's called a romantic historical fiction, which means there's scenes of awful sexual assault that attempted to be whitewashed with that's how the world was back then. Besides, you want a better fantasy flick from the 80s starring Rutger Hauer? The choice is Ladyhawke. But the director of Flesh and Blood didn't stop there, so I guess really? This evaluation begins in 1987, where the director of Flesh and Blood finally revealed his first masterpiece, Robocop. Folks, it doesn't get much better than Robocop for 80s movies. So many other places on YouTube can tell you all the basics on Robocop. Go over its stellar cast and its plotline, which some people even think is a roman à clef for the story of Jesus. But given how this is what happens to Alex Murphy, I think I get how the movie Passion of the Christ was made. The phrase, "hold my beer," comes to mind. This evaluation is going to take into consideration the story, the plot, the time it was released, and then disregard all of that because it's the same thing the creators of this week's evaluation did apparently. But we're going to stay in the year 1987 and take a look at Robocop, the film. Robocop is one of the most talked about 80s action films, and with good reason. The cast is chock-a-block full of character actors, and its dialogue and characters fit each of those actors perfectly. You got Ronnie Cox as Dick Jones. Alright, Cox and Dick, that's what you've got to do, right? If that's what the script calls for, I mean. Anyway, playing the kind of character he plays in all of his 80s action flicks. You got Kurtwood, I'm not Michael Ironside Smith, playing Clarence Boddicker. Amazing job, and he goes on to be the dad on That 70s Show, so you can believe that he is a hard ass for reals. You got Miguel Ferrer, rest in peace, as a corporate slimeball Bob Morton. Mix all that together, and you got a hell of a murderer's row of acting talent making up a delicious stew for a Judge Dredd movie. Seriously, the movie most folks would recognize as a 100% original, American production began its life as an adaptation of this dude. Judge Dredd, no lie. In very early drafts of the script, Ed Neumeyer, while working on Blade Runner, was influenced by 2000 AD Comics' own Judge Dredd. This is what Robocop was supposed to look like. And this is what Judge Dredd does look like. So, an authoritarian ruling class has a violent, no-nonsense, brutal law enforcement officer that is stronger and more dangerous than the average human. Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Well, now we have an inspiration, but the plot was going to be set in the future, like Blade Runner, and possibly in that universe, where a fully robotic cop's AI would come to be more human and gain sentience, which in this day and age would look like this. I have to say, the reality of Robocops is a lot lamer than the fantasy. But the story was bent, morphed, and molded over time, much like the clay mold of that Judge Dredd figure, into a wholly unique style of movie, and an original character. Orion Pictures, known then for pot boilers and schlock for the most part, picked up the script, and they fashioned it into what we know today as Robocop, the future of law enforcement. Starring Peter Weller, and with a cast of top-tier character talent, this flick is one of my all-time favorites. If you've never seen this one, check it out. They remade Robocop, and in my opinion, it was mid, but it did keep the spirit of Robocop alive, and the name as a brand alive as well. And let's just say, in the video game world, keeping Robocop alive and well just gets harder and harder. Let's start with the very, very good here. Data East had a killer app in the arcades with Robocop. A side-scroller like Contra or Shinobi, this game used authentic audio from the movie and had a booming sound system. You could hear a Robocop machine in an arcade for miles around. The "your move, creep," or just the roar of the modified pistol Robocop fires in the game, you knew when someone dropped a quarter in this excellent cabinet. As one of the most popular arcade machines of the 80s, it was naturally considered for console release on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Data East had released a ton of their arcade smashes on the NES. And the NES version, while not a classic or as fun as the arcade version, certainly slaked the thirst for Robocop action at home for the moment. The sequels to the movies were also produced as games at home. The second pair were published by Ocean, who were just as guilty as LJN in their crimes against great licenses on the NES in my opinion. Robocops 2 and 3, like the movies, were a study in diminishing returns, though Robocop 3 in the arcades wasn't exactly setting the world ablaze with arcade action. And the fascination with Robocop didn't stop in the 80s, or the 90s, with the very good but difficult Robocop vs. Terminator for the SNES and Genesis, and beyond. And herein lies the problem, because even though LJN are widely known as laughin' jokin' numbnuts, and Ocean is often a sea of mediocrity, there is one beyond all licensed game creators who suffocate any decent content out of a franchise and puke out the lowest form of video entertainment in the history of video games. And who might that be? TITUS. More like shitus. Crap. Just total crap. This company abuses franchises like a mean drunk. Superman 64 assassinated all thoughts of a Superman video game until, well, we're still pending. And in 2003, they decided to break down the one and only Robocop with their travesty of a video game. I don't know if it's personal animus on the folks of TITUS against the United States and our heroes, but Superman, Robocop. Anyway, TITUS announced in 2002 that they had the rights to make a Robocop video game, and any games they wanted, and the entire gaming world shrieked in nightmarish horror. And what they delivered? Well, let's look at that now. But steel yourself. If you already liked Robocop, this is going to be like watching Robocop get vivisected and sold for parts. If you're just now becoming aware of Robocop, it's going to be much more the same thing, but you'll have a more detached horror at all of this. The second worst game on the Xbox.
Hey, just look at it.
Christ, he's been stripped.
Look, this won't be pretty. First, Robocop moves like a shopping cart with a broken wheel. A shopping cart with lead in its ass, and a broken wheel, and a head injury. You'll need to change the control scheme before you start playing, or take some Dramamine and let her rip. This game is cheap. Not unfair. Just the very definition of tawdry, quickly made, and threadbare. It plays like it legit was created in a weekend, and one weekend of not particularly hard work. Look at this nonsense. First, for an outfit called Renderware, they render people to look like Mego dolls, stop motion by a mental patient. Also, check out Robocop's jackassery here. Yeah, Murphy, cars are just cheap for the precinct. Like they didn't just spend all of the damn money on your tin-plated nutsack, you boner. Oof. Murphy looks like he's sculpted from beef and used fleshlights. And the limp sync sucks, well, in TITUS' own language, merde. Anyway, they get Robocop's motions from the movie right, but hell, the Data East arcade game did that. I don't know. It's pretty damn lazy not to render and animate the newscaster, but from what I've seen that they do to a face when they try to make it talk, well... yeah, let's not go there. Robocop as a game is linear with medium-sized levels. Think Duke Nukem without the wit, or sense of game balance, or sense of self-knowledge and irony. The voice actors sound like they are bored with the very concept of speaking out loud and specifically hate emoting in the English language. The enemies are not varied. It's Human 1, Human 2, Human 3, and Civilian. The levels are industrial settings with a spectrum of colors ranging from gray to toxic waste storage brown. And by the way, I know there ought to be other enemies here, but apparently Robocop kills Ed 209 in the opening cutscene. Nothing in this game will challenge you like the way it dares your gag reflex not to vomit. It escalates in difficulty a little until you meet up with the final boss. This thing. A snake robot who has the crafty and clever attack pattern of a lawn sprinkler. The sound is emitted from a DVD, but sounds like it's coming down a long hallway, and the sound effects are very stock. This is all the components of a game tossed in a box, and they shook their living crap out of it, hoping the pieces would amalgamate into a playable game, but what happens is...
Hey, just look at it.
Christ, he's been stripped.
Here's a message from Robocop himself.
Hello, I am Robocop. On behalf of TITUS and everyone involved in making this travesty of a video game, I wish to apologize. But you must understand, when I gave my likeness rights to TITUS, I did not realize they were a garbage compactor company and not, in fact, a software and games design company. Therefore, it is with my humble begging that you do not hold this against Robocop, and you leave the blame squarely on the shoulders of TITUS where it belongs. On a personal note, I wish they had been given a prime directive to not suck. Thank you.
And like Superman, 20 years in purgatory was the sentence. Now, we will be getting a new Robocop this month, which I have questions about, of course. But the real question remains... No! You do not get a license to play at all! This thing is terrible, okay? I would rather get a shunt from my butthole to my mouth than ever play that game again. It'll remain on my shelf as a testament to my courage and willpower and toughness, basically. But I'm not going to talk about that game ever again. I'll have to talk about TITUS sometimes in the future, but whoa, just thinking about that game makes me want to hurl, okay? Now, we may need the assistant next week because we've got another doozy on our plates, folks. Sorry. Things just keep moving in that direction where we're not going to be offering out many licenses this year, okay? Anyway, more than what I've said during this broadcast, which you should thumbs and, give me the subscribe. That would be nice, all right? More than that, more than anything I've said during this broadcast, in the next broadcast, or in any past broadcasts, remember, the most important thing is to follow me on twitch.tv, and always, it's Retro Station 1989 over at twitch.tv. Follow me over there. Or, I don't know, I'm going to jettison Splat from the airlock. Remember to always stay retro. Peace.
Get upset on the internet. You're assault adult. You're assault adult. Get upset on the internet. You're assault adult. Throwing out a hissy fit, your views ain't in the millions, and every up and comer is a threat to what you're dealing in. Instead of getting better, you just spout up on your Facebook, crying on your Twitter bit about how bad your case look. In case you didn't get it yet, allow me to rephrase it. You cry more than my 4-year-old. I'm actually amazed.